Okay, well, welcome everyone. It's nice to see you all here. We are so pleased tonight to have Karl Lietzenmayer step in at the last minute. We had a change, and he's such a good history guy for Northern Kentucky. He stepped right up. He is giving his Lafayette presentation of Lafayette's tour through, he toured the country, but he was in Kentucky in 1825, and Karl's going to share a whole lot of interesting information about that visit with you. A little bit about Karl. Karl's worn a lot of hats over the years. He's been a teacher, music director, chemist, above all else, historian, of course. He's been a member of the Kenton County Historical Society since 1993. That's good, that's a good run. He's produced and edited the semi-annual Northern Kentucky Heritage for, I think, this year will be 30. Is that right? Yeah, it's a great magazine. If you don't get it, please do. It's wonderful. I learn something every time I read it. Karl was presented with the Two-Headed Calf Award by Barringer Crawford in 2017, swiftly followed by the Lifetime Dedication to Kentucky History Award by the Kentucky Historical Society in 2018. Clearly, that dedication has not stopped yet, so join me in welcoming Karl Lietzenmayer.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Before you start filming, I want to say just a few words about the craft. I've been fascinated by this man for quite a long time because I thought I was idealistic, but this guy is the most idealistic person I have ever met or ever been confronted with in my entire life. He's always been a man of principle and absolute unselfishness, incredible, which you will see. Okay, without, all right, you can hit that, okay. All right, Lafayette. Is that right? Yeah. There he is as a small child. I'm going to try to go through his life because those of you who know nothing about him, it's a lot more involved than you think. Obviously, he's noble. He is a member of a significant French noble family, reaching back, well, I don't know, 800, 900 years. He had an antecedent, or an ancestor, I should say, who was in Joan of Arc's army. That's how long this family has been a noble family in France. Okay, born in 1757 to privilege, of course. And as the simple word of idealistic maybe covers it. Okay. This is his birthplace. Chateau Chavanac in south-central France, south of Paris. And I'm going to put my glasses on now. His full name is, brace yourself, Marie-Joseph Paul Yves Roche Gilbert de Montier de Lafayette. He's known as Gilbert. Okay. His father is Michel Christophe du Montier. And his father was killed in the 7 Years' War when Gilbert was 2. I'm sorry. So obviously didn't know his father very much. We call that the French and Indian War here, okay? All right. So his mother, after his death, moved to Paris. Okay, that's his father. Sorry, I can't have these in color. I don't have them in color. This is his mother. He inherits the title and the wealth of the family. Okay, she moved and raised by his paternal grandmother and aunts. And he listened to stories of chivalry and would pretend to be a quixotic character fighting evil as a child. So he lived with his mother in Paris, and as he grew up, he went to the Collège de Plessis, which is part of the University of Paris. The same, Plessis is the same place where Robespierre went to college. He took a classical curriculum, which reinforced his idealistic nature. Okay, here we are. So, he was orphaned at 13. His mother and paternal grandmother died, and he inherits everything. Okay, so, in 1774, he marries this lady, Adrienne de Noailles. You pronounce that no way. I know it doesn't look like it, but that's it. And I have the wife of a good friend of mine who is a Parisian, and she told me that. All right, so I got it right from the start. Gilbert is 16, and Adrienne is 14. It was an arranged marriage, as noble marriages are, or were. Okay. And he joins his father-in-law's troops called the Noailles Dragoons. Now, most of the noble families would form the troops for the king. It's not like we have a standing army today. And this is before the French Revolution, of course. Okay. And he says, Lafayette says, when my wife's family obtained a place for me at court, I did not hesitate to be disagreeable to preserve my independence. It was while I was in that frame of mind that I first heard of the troubles in America. He gets involved in the Freemasons, and actually has a dinner with Prince William, who is King George III's brother, and they are estranged. Gee, that's just happening again in Britain, isn't it? And so he brings Lafayette into the Masonic order, which makes buddies with people like George Washington when the time comes. Now, the American Revolution is starting, and Silas Deane is the first diplomat that we sent to France to try to get them to help us. He signed up Lafayette on the December the 12th, 1776, and he was swamped by French volunteers. There were nobles, generals, even bishops, unemployed in their homeland, and King Louis discouraged American involvement because he didn't want another war with England. So he wasn't really in favor of it, but you have to realize that the Enlightenment was going on philosophically. He had Montesquieu and Rousseau and so on. The famous statement of Montesquieu, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So we must have a separation of powers. That's where we get that idea, right? Okay. So they were all excited about this is going to be the first republic in the world. Just think for a minute how excited they must have been. They're living under a despotic monarch. Okay, so actually, to make everything most are not welcomed by the Continental Congress, that's right, because they were adventurers, primarily, except Gilbert de Montier Lafayette. He came to on his own, and actually he actually snuck out of France because no one wanted him to go. Didn't tell his Adrienne or anything, who was pregnant. They already had a little daughter. So he wrote Adrienne a letter asking for forgiveness. That's what husbands do, don't they? Yeah. For keeping his plans secret. He told her the welfare of America was all intimately connected with the happiness of all mankind. How idealistic can you be? I mean, I just continue to be amazed at this man. So, all right. Okay, all right, we're a little ahead right here, but we'll get up. He lands June the 3rd, 1777, at the Benjamin Hugon plantation in Carolina. The Hugons were Huguenot French people, which means Protestant, okay? We call them Huguenots, but it's not, it's Huguenot, okay? Trying to be proper. All right, so the entourage, he had a lot of nobles with him on the ship that he actually purchased. He purchased his own ship and crew and paid for it to come over here. So he's, as I say, he's wealthy. They get horses and wagons to travel to Philadelphia. They arrive in Charleston first. The entourage goes 900 miles on lousy roads to go to Philadelphia. The wagons break up and they had to abandon them. The poor roads made travel exhausting, and not all the volunteers were received very well, as it says, especially those that came from Santo Domingo, which French colonies. They had an extremely arrogant attitude, it says, and that's kind of natural to minor nobility. So, this is from his notes. Our reception could not have been more uncivil. A gentleman, actually Congressman Lovell from Massachusetts, received us in the street where he left us after calling us adventurers in very good French, by the way. He said, last year we did lack officers, but this year we have plenty and all are experienced, so get lost. But Lafayette's reception differed due to his own personality. And he got into the Continental Congress, and reading aloud, he said, after the sacrifices I have made, I have the right to exact two favors. One is to serve at my own expense, and the other is to begin as a volunteer. Congress accepted that argument and appointed Lafayette a major general to Washington's staff. Washington was attracted to Lafayette's modest demeanor and devotion to the American cause. And Lafayette considered Washington his father, since he didn't know his own father. So, all right. So he is sort of like an intermediary between the King of France and the Continental Congress. It goes back and forth. And it probably wasn't very difficult because to convince the French king that it's a good idea to help these guys, because they just lost Canada, remember, in the 7 Years' War. And maybe they would get it back if French people, the French army helped the American cause. And that's what was going through the king's mind. Okay. All right. Now, well, we're already at Yorktown, but I want to say something about something that happened before. Since I put this up, there was a new book out called Lafayette at Brandywine. That's in Pennsylvania. It's we call it sometimes Brandywine Creek. We lost our butt in that fight. It was a loss. And it's the first time that Lafayette led troops and got wounded there. He was 20 years old, found himself in the front lines of this significant battle, rallying retreating troops when he was hit in the calf. After his boot filled with blood, he exited the field. Then, this is where he learns, this is his baptism of fire, as it were. The book is kind of hard to get, but the title is Lafayette at Brandywine, and it reads very well. There's a lot of detail in it that I don't want to go into here, because we'll be here all night. Okay, so as you know, he was also during these times, during these years, he's encouraging the king to support us, which he does. Okay, so in '79, he goes back to Paris with dispatches for the American commissioners, who at this time is Benjamin Franklin and John Adams, and a letter of thanks for King Louis XVI for helping. All right, in the spring of '80, he comes back, lands in Boston, to very low morale among American troops. And they were very uplifted by his return. He's already grabbed our hearts already. The king gives Lafayette the privilege to first tell Washington of the French force under Rochambeau, General Rochambeau. But Rochambeau stalls for a whole year before joining the fight. Well, that's the French. What can I say? All right. So in '81, Yorktown comes, and most of you, I've been there. It's very interesting to be there. You know exactly where all the troops were situated, and Lafayette held an entire side of the battlefield, and they blocked in Cornwallis, and he surrendered. And that essentially was the end of the revolution. You can't imagine. If you read books about the revolution, on and on and on, things happen. Brandywine could have wiped out the entire army had there been, the book says, 2 more hours of light.
Wow.
The British could have wiped us out. And they didn't pursue us after the battle was stopped. Big mistake on their part, because we were extremely vulnerable. Every time I see things like this, or read things like this, I don't really know how we made it. I honestly don't. So, okay. They don't want Lafayette to get involved in the discussions about the treaty, as it says there. Okay. A word about this. After the Revolution, Washington resigns, as you know. His status goes back to Mount Vernon. This is the letter that Lafayette wrote him about that. The conduct you had on that occasion was highly praised throughout all Europe. Most thought he would be a king or a Cromwell. Your returning to a private station is called the finishing stroke to an unparalleled character. Never did a man exist who so honorably stood in the opinions of mankind. So, this was, we Americans were really lucky to have people like Lafayette and Washington, etc. Okay. At the end of the war, Henry Knox founds the society called the Society of the Cincinnati. If anybody doesn't know about who this guy named Cincinnati is, it's from Roman history. And the story briefly is he was a farmer in Italy when somebody was invading them and they were in dire straits, and he took over the troops and defeated whoever it was, and I don't remember, and then went back to being a farmer, which just like Washington. That's the idea. Okay, so the society is open to all French and American officers, and the society was hereditary. I should say is hereditary. It still exists, which shocked John Adams because he thought that Lafayette founded it, but he didn't. It was Henry Knox, who was Washington's cannon commander, wasn't he? I actually met, I gave this talk to the Sons of the American Revolution, and in the audience was a member of the Society of Cincinnati. How about that? I actually met one. So, America, now, in 1784, he comes back to America again, and his last visit to see Washington at Mount Vernon, he advocates a stronger union than the Articles of Confederation, as you history buffs know, were pretty weak. And James Madison traveled with Lafayette on a 10-state tour at that time. He spoke of the three hobby horses of a republic: a Franco-American alliance, a stronger federal union, and the manumission of slaves. Okay, he returns to France, and okay, that's what we just said. Now, the French Revolution happens. This is a picture of the key from the Bastille, which Lafayette sends to Washington. And when I was at Mount Vernon, it's still hanging on the wall in Mount Vernon. That's pretty cool, isn't it? Lafayette is seen as the keeper of public order in France, and he's a member of the État Général, the States General. I have to say it in English so you know what I'm talking about. It becomes the National Assembly of France. As is the case for most moderates, which I see him as, he is suspected both by the king and the revolutionaries, so he's wedged in the middle. Okay, the king is arrested, and Lafayette is his jailer. That's how he got the key. So, trying to find my place. He's enlisted as leader of the revolutionaries, much like the American Minutemen. He designs their uniforms and what will be the national French flag. The tricolore was designed by Lafayette. He orders the destruction of the Bastille and sends the key to Mount Vernon, where it's on display to this very day. When the king and the assembly arrive in Paris, Lafayette is wedged between them. In 91, Lafayette resigns all commissions and retires to Chavagnac, his birthplace, which I showed you before, I think. Now the terror. I'm trying to go through this light because we're going to run out of time if I don't hurry up. There's a war with Austria. Lafayette accepts a command in that war. I don't know why they went. I didn't check why they went to war with Austria because it's, you know, it's a side issue here. Adrian Lafayette himself and the children were captured and imprisoned for 5 years by the Austrians. His property was seized. Adrien's family was all guillotined. Adrian and Lafayette's life was spared by petitions from us, from Americans. James Monroe was now ambassador to France, and Lafayette's family was released, and they moved to Denmark just to get out of the way for a while. Napoleon. See on this list?
Yep. Keep going.
Yep. Okay. That's LaGrange. That's Adrian's estate. Now, there's no way family. Napoleon lifts the interdict of Lafayette, so he comes back. Adrian's neglected property, LaGrange, is restored. Lafayette's family retires to LaGrange, and he does not accept positions in Napoleon's government. Here he is again, Mr. Idealistic. Here's what he says about Napoleon. If Bonaparte had been willing to serve the cause of liberty, I should have been devoted to him. But I can neither approve of an arbitrary government nor associate myself with it. Wow. So Thomas Jefferson knows he's in trouble over there. He offers Lafayette American acreage, but he declines. Then Adrian dies. In 1818, he's elected to the French Assembly, and all factions are suspicious of Lafayette. So by 1824, he's defeated for re-election. Okay. Albert Gallatin now is the ambassador to France, invites Lafayette to America. President James Monroe encourages Congress to confirm the invite. Lafayette now is at age 67. He sells his livestock, borrows money, and some books, and books passage, pardon me. He had broken his leg in France and now walks with the help of a cane. He brings George, his son, George Washington de Lafayette. Wonder who he's named after. A friend by the name of Monsieur de Sion, a valet called Bastien, and the secretary, Auguste Levasseur, whose notes were later published, and I have read them. It's interesting, I live on Levasseur Avenue in Covington, and Eugene, I'm digressing, but Eugene de Levasseur came here after Napoleon fell. He was a captain, I believe, in Napoleon's army. I wonder if they're related. I wonder. Interesting. Okay. The entire United States was excited about Lafayette's visit. Probably no visitor in history of America received such a welcome. He was overwhelmed by America's excitement, and his tour added a word to the American lexicon. Fated has given an extravagant welcome. That comes from his name. He visited every state, 24 at the time. Now, okay, that's our governor. Lafayette calmed the sectionalism of contested election of 1824, if you remember your history. No candidate received a majority of electoral votes, and Andrew Jackson received the majority of actual votes. So the House of Representatives ends up choosing John Quincy Adams. And of course, our Henry Clay was appointed as Secretary of State, which made ill feelings among the Jacksonians.
That's right.
Okay. All right, the steamboat to Louisville is a subject. We're finally in Kentucky. All right. I'm going to take this out, if I may. All right. The numbers in parentheses as the population of each of our towns at the time. As you see, Georgetown had a big question mark because it didn't appear until the 1830 census. Okay, so here's what we did. Lafayette calmed sexualism. Okay. He went to, after he came to the East Coast, he went to the South, the Southern tour, and the issue of slavery, of course, darkens his soul. He's convinced that slavery will pass away. After touring southern states, he boarded a steamboat by the name of Natchez in New Orleans and sailed for St. Louis. He took the Natchez to Cumberland River, to Nashville, to visit Andrew Jackson, who just lost to J.Q. Adams. Surely he spoke to Jackson concerning his bitter disappointment. He took a boat called the Mechanic, which he called the L'Artisan. You know, that means mechanic in French. And at Louisville, it hit a snag and founders. Snags were the destroyers of steamboats. Steam had only been in use since 1811, and most rivers were still uncleared. The snag boat of Henry Shreve was not invented yet. Levasseur notes describe this event. As the steamboat paddled up the Ohio River against a 4-mile current, the Marquis was busy replying to some 600 unanswered letters. He was in his cabin, asleep by 10. At midnight, he was awakened by a terrible shock. The boat suddenly stopped. George Washington de Lafayette leapt out of bed and with Levasseur rushed on deck to see what happened. The captain looked into the hold and cried, "A snag, quick! Get Lafayette and bring him to my skiff." He was calmly dressing with the aid of Le Valet Bastien when Levasseur entered his cabin. "What news?" he asked. "We are sinking, mon général," replied Levasseur, "and must not waste a moment." George and he urged the general to go on deck, but Bastien had not yet dressed him. He's noble. See, that's the way they think. Oh, I'm not dressed, I can't go up. So, well, he is. You know. He told them to go and he would follow. After all, he is a nobleman. "What?" exclaimed George. "Do you think we would leave you for an instant?" They snatched up a few important papers and seized him by the arm and led him to the door. He smiled at their haste, but followed. Then, he's always so calm, you know. Then halfway up the stairs, he turned back. In despair, they asked him, why was he going down again? "But my snuff box." So, he exclaimed, "I left it on my table." It was a snuff box that bore a miniature of Washington, and Levasseur ran back to get it. Well, I don't blame him. The boat was lurching horribly on deck, and on deck, the 50-odd passengers in terror were rushing toward the one lifeboat. Oh my gosh. The night was so black that they could see nothing, and the mechanic already had an alarming list to starboard. The confusion was so great they could not reach the rail. Levasseur shouted to the crowd, "Here is General Lafayette!" The mechanic, the desired effect was produced. The crowd opened a passage for him, but he declared that all others must be saved first. We'll go again. The passengers insisted on his getting into the skiff. With his stiff leg, it was a ticklish business. Two men took him under the arms. Levasseur leapt into the skiff, and they lowered him over the side and rowed the group to the Kentucky shore. But when the Marquis realized that Georges, his son, was not there, his calm demeanor left him, and he called, "Georges, Georges!" The mechanic was on her beam by now. Levasseur took a dozen persons and rowed them ashore, but Georges was not among them, nor a French companion, Monsieur Sion, nor Bastien. Levasseur rowed back to the port side, still out of the water, and called out for Georges. Finally, a voice was heard. "Is that you, Monsieur Levasseur?" Bastien and Georges were clinging to the side. Georges remained until all passengers were rescued. On shore, his father embraced Georges, and all passengers were accounted for. A mattress had floated ashore, and the old campaigner just laid down on it and calmly went to sleep. Unbelievable, wasn't it? A fine steamer called the Paragon was coming downriver in the morning, heading to New Orleans with a cargo of whiskey and tobacco. Its owner happened to be on board of the mechanic and requested his Paragon to turn around and pick up everyone and sail north to Louisville. Another example of American esteem for Lafayette. Reroute the steamboat to assist. How about that? So now we are at Louisville. Population 5,500. Lafayette embraced comrades he had not seen for over 40 years. There was a crowd of 10,000 people in the streets because everybody came. Then to Shelbyville. Population 1,200. Heavy rain made the road difficult, required stopping at Megawan's Tavern. There is a plaque commemorating that in Shelbyville, by the way. Militia from surrounding towns added to the parade into Frankfort. Population 2,000. Lafayette makes a speech at the public square. Festivals eliminated in the formal dinner with speeches and toasts by dignitaries and governors. Versailles, or what Lafayette would call it Versailles, but Versailles' population 900 was an outdoor barbecue, meeting old revolutionary friends, and the rain stops. Lexington, 6,000. Reception at the Keene Mansion, today Keeneland Racetrack. Major John Keene served with Lafayette. The area revolutionary veterans all gather at the Keene home. A ball and reception at the Masonic Hall, all traveled on what is now US 25. But it's a dirt road. Okay, where are we? All right, now, somebody asked me, since Sherman Tavern has been restored, you all know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Okay, Sherman Tavern was a stagecoach stop, and the building there dates from about 1810, and it has been restored. And the Gallatin County, oh no, that's Grant County, isn't it? Grant County Society called us and other groups, maybe even called you all, wanted to know how we can save this. So we all got together, and by God, we saved it. So it's wonderful to be there. And the children from the school system go there on tours to see how people lived in 1810. And I'm sure people ask me, oh, you think he stopped there? Yeah, he probably did. Because the stagecoach stopped, you know, you gotta water the horses. But you don't write that down. So there's no record, but I'm sure he did. I'm sure he stopped in Florence, because that was a stop also. Okay. Now, the urban legends. Now, our governor and the governor of Tennessee were in this entourage, traveling north through Kentucky, by the way. And they had a whole entourage of troops on white horses, and you can imagine. All right. Now, this is a picture of the John Keene estate. I want you to look at that, because that's presently restored. William Southgate's wife is Adeliza Keene, and her family were plantation and slave owners in Lexington. Okay. Now, the urban legends. I found 3. The Carneal House in Covington has a whole lot of mistakes on the sign. And the Joseph Tasso story is an interesting thing for my county. And the Piats is the way they're supposed to be printed, but we call them Piats, don't we? The Piats of East Bend, that's your county, is it not?
Right.
Yeah.
That's also the Piats at Federal Hall, too. There's 2 different Piat families in Boone County. And there's 2, they were Revolutionary War soldiers. One went to East Bend, and the other went to Federal Hall, right where 275.
Yeah, Federal Hall, right. That's part of the Piats places. But all of these 3 have an urban legend connected to Lafayette, which is not. None of them are true. Okay. Let's go with the first one. This is the sign outside the Carneal House in Covington. Now, research for this house, which we feel should be called the Gano/Southgate House, because those were the first residents, and Carneal never lived there, for one thing. I don't know why this happens, you know, it just does. Research for this house was taken exclusively from newspaper accounts. I found that out by talking to the office in Frankfurt that does those signs. And an assumption was made that the Southgates were at home when Lafayette visited. They were not. They were, in fact, at Adeliza Keene's house in Lexington. Okay? Now, that's the house. It's absolutely fabulous. First brick house still standing in Covington, 1816. That's when we estimate that it is built. So we are in the process of trying to change that sign, but those suckers are $2,000 a piece. So, I mean, we had a GoFundMe page, and we raised enough money to put up 2 new ones, but we're going to have to raise another $2,000. One of my family who worked for the city said, well, heck, there's a rich guy that lives in that. He's a vice president of Procter & Gamble. Maybe you could talk him into, you know, springing for it. We're going to do something. I don't know what. The next one is someone you probably never heard of, Joseph Tasso. Tasso was a brilliant violinist, an Italian who was born in Mexico and grew up in Louisville. How that happened, I don't know. But as a very young child, he studied at the Paris Conservatory, and he met the Marquis de Lafayette. So there is the string that ties the two together, see? A tiny, tiny thing. Oh, he knew it in France a long time ago. All right, so by the time Lafayette comes through here, he's living in Louisville as a young man, and he is part of the entourage on the white horses that go up US 25, or the Lexington-Covington Road, with Lafayette. But that doesn't mean, that he visited his house. That's how things just go. It's like the telephone game, in the room. You talk the same, and you don't recognize it when it comes back around. That's what these things are. Okay. He rode on one of the white horses accompanying Lafayette entourage, later moved to northern Kentucky. The home shown here is now the site of the Frisch's restaurant on Kentucky 17. Okay? The slight connection with Lafayette spurned these stories. Lafayette visited Tasso at home, but he didn't live here in 1825. The home is at least post-Civil War in style. Okay. He may have played at the reception in Cincinnati, but he didn't bring his violin. He was riding a horse. And surely Cincinnati has plenty of musicians. Okay, now the next urban legend. Okay, this is the Piats of East Bend. A Huguenot French family, very early, very significant family, right? Piat Park, which is Piat Park, really. In Cincinnati, it's the same family. So anyway, different members of the family, but the same family. There was a legend that Lafayette visited this home, which is now gone, of course. It is false. Why? Because he didn't go that way. He was on US 25. So he couldn't have visited there. However, the Piat family fought with him in the Revolution. That's the connection, and that's it. So everybody wants a piece of it, right? Everybody wants a piece of it. Okay.
Where is that house now?
That today is the power plant.
No,
Yeah.
no, sir, no.
Pardon me?
It's on Lawrenceburg Ferry Road, you go to the end of that road.
No, that's Federal Hall you're
No,
talking
you're
about.
Oh, you're thinking of Federal Hall. That's
My
different.
mind's-
That's different, yeah. Federal Hall's still standing, or sort of standing, isn't
Sort
it?
of.
It's gone now?
It's pretty,
Totally gone.
It's pretty
yeah.
long, yeah.
Wow.
And what was significant about this house was, I put the National Register application together for it. And General E.R.S. Canby was born there.
Yeah.
Who took the last surrender of the Civil War.
Wow.
That's how we got on the register, really.
Oh,
It's gone.
well, that's why we have drawings of it, because it's on the National Registry, and the federal government requires that you study it and make records before you tear it down.
And the other thing, CG&E did a book on it also as part of the deal.
Oh,
They put a nice book together on it.
okay. Now, where are we? This is the portrait by Ari Scheffer. Now, that hangs in the House of Representatives. However, our own artist, Matthew Harris Jewett, was commissioned by the legislature to paint him. But he couldn't catch him because he kept moving. So he went to this painting and did a rendition of it, which is pretty good. If you've ever been in the old courthouse in Frankfurt, that's where ours hangs. It's the Jewett version of Ari Scheffer's, but it's the same kind of pose. And as far as we know, see, he's got his cane. Lafayette really liked this rendition more than most others. So that's good. Okay. Now at Cincinnati, Ohio Governor Morrow attended, as well as the Indiana governor, and General William Henry Harrison delivered the welcoming speech at a banquet at what was known as the Cincinnati Hotel, which was on Front Street, and he spent 2 days in Cincinnati. And May 21st, the entourage leaves at midnight for a brief stop in Maysville, and then goodbye, Kentucky. Now, here's what's happening. I'm sorry that's such a bad picture. There are plaques and signs going up all over the East Coast, the Eastern United States, commemorating his visit, because in 2025 it's 200 years. And this is being done by the William Pomeroy Foundation. I looked up their website, and William Pomeroy obviously is a wealthy man, and I'm not sure how he made his money, but he had bone cancer and found a match of bone marrow transplant and saved his life. So he started a foundation that registers all the people who have donations and want donations together. And he also has part of the foundation to, what he says, quote, to celebrate community history. And that's why he's putting these up. Now, I go to Trinity Episcopal Church in Covington, and we just got a sign by the Pomeroy people about the 19th Amendment, because Fanny Eugenia Farmer, her name was the push, or the impetus, the leader, I guess you call it, of women's suffrage here in the 1890s, and they met at Trinity Church, so that's why we got that sign. So that's what they're doing. So if you see those, that's what the Pomeroy Foundation is doing. Okay, I had a terrible time getting this picture. It was perfectly beautiful. Actually, it was on NPR, their website. So I pressed my print button, and it comes up. Of course, it asks you how many pages you want and all that. And right through the middle of the picture is, please donate. Well, I already donate, and I couldn't get the damn thing off. So I kept clicking, and it moved. Like I had to move that far, and I had to cut it. I'm sorry, but that's the way it is. I don't know. Anything to make my life harder. Okay.
Where's that going to be installed?
Pardon me?
Where will that be?
Oh, all right. If you notice, that bridge in the back is from Newport, and it comes down, and this little park that's over there, I don't know if that's called Schmale Park or not, but it shows models of the original dams on the river, and this on the left, upper left, is that steamboat paddle on stilts. That's, I'm sure you've seen that, and you say, why did they put that up there? But that's where it sits, right next to it. They just unveiled that like a week ago, I think, something like that. Okay. The legislature paid Jewett $1,500 to do that painting. That's a lot of money.
1,500.
Okay. Fine. All right. Now we're ready to talk about the epilogue. Okay. After passing the mouth of the Big Sandy River, Lafayette passed forever the borders of Kentucky, and he left enduring love and reverence as only Washington himself inspired. The cities, towns, and counties and roads were named after him, Fayette County in Kentucky was one of the very first named for the general. His name appears today over 100 times on our maps, more frequently than all but 2 or 3 of our own founders. Another American practice was naming new settlements after estates of the founders, like Mount Vernon, Monticello, Montpelier. Now a fourth name, LaGrange, city in our own state, began to appear. At his death in 1834, funeral honors were paid him throughout the world. Congress ordered the same honors that had been rendered at the death of Washington. Lafayette had 4 children, Henriette, who died age 2, Anastasie, George, and Virginie. That's it.